welcome to Agenda 2030. The program gives you insight into the impact of the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, popularly known as the SDGs in Nigeria. The set of 17 goals and 169 targets of the SDGs aim to help countries end poverty and hunger, protect the planet from degradation, foster peace, and realize human rights. I am Toyin Nkamiang John. On today's episode, we will be focusing on the issues of abuses in Nigeria and the strategic efforts of the government to tackle the menace. The SDGs in Goal 5, 10 and 16 seek to address the dehumanizing act as well as ensure equality in human dealings. In the course of the program, we will also bring you reports on ways to mitigate the challenges. Stay with us. Welcome back. Every year, thousands of people, especially women and girls, face diverse forms of abuses, ranging from rape, battery, torture, amongst others. In this overview report, Agenda 2030 X-ray the Dehumanizing Act. The report.
There is no better gauge of increasing rate of various forms of abuses and violence against children, women and other vulnerable members of the society across the country than the regularity with which stories of such occurrences come up in traditional and new media in Nigeria. But the phenomenon is not limited to Nigeria. Hence, the United Nations mandates countries to take steps to significantly reduce all forms of abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence when the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, were adopted in 2015. An increasing amount of research is beginning to offer a global overview of the extent of violence against women and children, with a growing body of evidence suggesting that violence against women, victimization in childhood, adolescence, or adulthood are highly prevalent. This menace has a direct economic impact along with the human and emotional costs. Violence against women and children reflects unequal power relations, resulting in undue domination and discrimination of women and children. The 1993 Vienna Declaration and Program of Action regard violence against women and children as a serious violation of their fundamental human rights. Practices such as physical and sexual violence, as well as economic, psychological, and emotional abuse occurring in the family in such forms as threats, intimidation, battery, sexual abuse and molestation of children, economic deprivation, marital rape, femicide, female genital mutilation, and traditional practices harmful to women are still prevalent in many societies, including Nigeria. Violence also continues to occur in communities in the form of threats, trafficking in women and children, forced prostitution, and the deliberate neglect of girls and violence against women in armed conflict. Perpetrators of these acts are numerous, ranging from spouses and partners, parents, other family members, neighbors, and men in positions of power or influence. Due to the sensitivity of the subject, violence is almost universally underreported. Nevertheless, the prevalence of such violence suggests that globally, millions of women are experiencing violence or living with its consequences. Most abuse often escalates from threats and verbal abuse to physical violence. Domestic violence may even end up in murder. Usually, the key elements of domestic abuse are intimidation, humiliating the other person, and physical injury. Even though physical assault or physical battering is criminalized, the act has continued in many fronts. While the prevalence of violence against women and children continue to increase, existing measures to protect them against violence have proved inadequate, ineffective, and biased against the victims. Violence against women and children in Nigeria is perpetrated by inadequate legal framework to address this important social phenomenon. Where the legal provisions exist, a poor understanding of such provisions at the national and subnational levels hamper progress in the efforts to protect women and children. This is complicated by delays, manipulation, and obsolescence of the judicial process. In addition, poverty, stigmatization, illiteracy, and the overall poor socio-economic status of the victims militate against progress. It is believed that strengthening the judicial structure and taking appropriate measures to enforce laws and impose penalties, punishment, and other mechanisms will help in the prevention and eradication of violence against women and children. Introducing, as a matter of priority, administrative mechanisms for women and children subjected to violence, effective access to counseling, restitution, reparation, and other forms of dispute resolution will no doubt complement these efforts. But the global community, and indeed the Nigerian government, has not been blind to this. The need to address the menace prompted the inclusion of institutional mechanisms in the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are defined in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The SDGs offer an opportunity to achieve the commitments on the prevention of violence against women made by governments in many previous declarations, resolutions, and international agreements. One of the goals related to violence is SDG 5, which addresses gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. This goal includes two specific targets on elimination of violence and harmful practices. Target 5.2 is set out to eliminate all forms of violence against all women and girls in public and private spheres, including trafficking and sexual and other types of exploitation. The goal of Target 5.3 is to eliminate all harmful practices such as child, early and forced marriage, and female genital mutilation. The inclusion of these specific targets is a recognition that addressing all forms of violence and harmful practices against women and girls is central to achieving gender equality and women's empowerment, which is essential for sustainable development. In addition, another goal, SDG 16, which promotes peace, justice, and strong institutions for sustainable development, calls in Target 16.2 for an end to abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence against children. This is the first time that a global development agenda has addressed all forms of violence against women and girls, as well as violence against children. Gender equality, peace, justice, and human rights, and the protection of vulnerable population groups are recognized as core areas where the world needs to improve, and they have been accorded prominence of place in the 2030 Agenda. The agenda contains specific metrics that guarantee that women and children are protected. Specifically, Indicator 5.1.1 seeks to determine whether legal frameworks are in the place to promote, enforce, and monitor equality and non-discrimination on the basis of sex. Indicators 5.2.1 and 5.2.2 make copious reference to sexual violence, while Indicator 16.1.3 is a metric that measures the proportion of the population subjected to physical, psychological, or sexual violence in the previous 12 months. Other SDGs indicators, such as 16.2.1, seek to protect children in particular by measuring the proportion of children aged 1 to 17 years who experienced any physical punishment and/or psychological aggression by caregivers in the past month. In Nigeria, since the adoption of the SDGs, different measures have been put in place. These range from institutional to creative works, as evident in the gender-based violence movie titled Filth, which depicts the ills and effects of crime, domestic abuses, gender-based violence, rape, and murder in the society. It is a conscious effort geared at using multimedia and entertainment to bring to limelight the various challenges of unhealthy cultural and criminal acts that have placed the disadvantaged and victims on the edge of human existence. Experts believe that the conscious implementation of the mandate of the SDGs by all stakeholders will no doubt help address the scourge.
In a bid to ensure that the weak and vulnerable in a society are guaranteed access to justice always, the federal government recently entered into a strategic partnership with the Nigerian Bar Association. The partnership is also to help establish a national structure that will frontally tackle cases of abuse of women and girls. Here's a report.
Just like the other areas of life, the poor and the vulnerable are always at the receiving end on issues of access to justice and respect for fundamental human rights. In Nigeria, the extent of such deprivations usually comes to the fore when the heads of the court system, especially at the state level, visit the prisons. Journalists on such tour usually come back with stories of detainees who have spent years in long confinement for petty crimes because of lack of proper legal representations or inability to pay paltry fines imposed by the court that would have secured them freedom. However, the problem of inequality in access of justice is a global one. Hence, the issue of peace, access to justice, building of efficient and strong legal institution was well encapsulated when the global community adopted the Sustainable Development Goals (SDGs) in 2015. Specifically, Targets 3, 5, and 6 of Goal 16 of the SDGs mandates countries to put in place statutes that will promote rule of law and equal access to justice for all. To nudge Nigeria towards the achievements of these targets, the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Sustainable Development Goals, the National Focal Officer for the 2030 Agenda in Nigeria, signed a Memorandum of Understanding with the Nigerian Bar Association, NBA. At the ceremony for the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding, which held at the Yar-Adua Center in Abuja, the partners gave assurances that the move will also help to accelerate efforts towards the attainment of Goals 10, 16, and 17, with focus on access to justice, peace, inequalities, inclusive society, and partnership for sustainable development. The Senior Special Assistant to the President on Sustainable Development Goals, Princess Adejoke Orelope-Adefulire, noted that the signing of the MOU was in line with Goal 17 of the 2030 Agenda, which encouraged partnership for the implementation and achievement of the development framework. The MOU captures the issue of inequality in access to justice, peace, and building of strong legal institutions with the aim of promoting the rule of law and equal access to justice for all, which was specifically stated in Targets 3, 5, and 6 of Goal 16 of the SDGs. The overall objective of the MOU, she noted, was to put Nigeria on the path of sustainable good governance for the overall benefits of Nigerians.
This memorandum of understanding is set to execute some laudable projects for programs both in legal and judicial sector. For example, the pro bono services shall be encouraged and significantly promoted under this collaboration. My experience working in Lagos State, both as Commissioner for Women Affairs and Poverty Alleviation as well as Deputy Governor, revealed monumental operation, deprivation, and also abuse of underprivileged. Indigent and vulnerable groups are oppressed because they don't have voice. This arises simply because of a lack of social and financial capacity to protect and to enforce their rights when trampled upon. This situation is worse due to the prevailing economic environment. And this is one of the motivating factors for this partnership, to provide opportunity for the stakeholders to come together to mitigate, defend, and protect this vulnerable segment of our society. With the execution of this Memorandum of Understanding today, Nigeria is making deliberate steps to gain the required traction and mileage on SDGs.
President of the Nigerian Bar Association, Mr. Abubakar Mahmood San, spoke on the essence of the proposal.
These projects are being designed to integrate Goals 16 and 17 and some relevant targets into set public interest initiatives in a context in which non-compliance with the principles of rule of law is rife, access to justice is difficult, and human rights violations are often frequent, and the presence of course, endemic corruptions and accountability of institutions ineffective and weak, and high level of impunity across the country.
The NBA president ordered that acceptance of NBA's proposal by the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on SDGs is recognition of the fact that enthronement of rule of law, access to justice, eradication of corruption, and strengthening of transparent and accountable institutions are indispensable requirements for sustainable development. In addition, The NBA president stated that to operationalize the MOU, NBA will work to combat corruption in all its forms, work towards building and strengthening accountable and transparent institutions, ensure protection of human rights, and creation of conditions for sustainable and peaceful society. With the MOU, Nigeria has kick-started its own obligations of making sure the goals is made a reality.
In 2015, when the 17 Sustainable Development Goals (SDGs) was adopted, the United Nations mandated countries to take steps to significantly reduce all forms of abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and violence. It is in line with this, as clearly stated in Goal 16 of the SDGs, that the issue of abuses took the center stage at the workshop put together by the wife of Nigeria's President, Aisha Buhari, through her non-governmental organization, the Future Assured program. We bring you highlights from the event.
The workshop, which was in response to the challenge of rising cases of violence against vulnerable segments of the Nigerian population, was attended by wives of governors, state chief judges, attorney general, NGOs, civil society groups, development institutions, wife of the President of the Republic of Niger, Dr. Lala Malika Usofu, wife of the Vice President, Mrs. Dolapo Usibanjo, and many other dignitaries. While declaring the event open, Nigeria's Vice President, Professor Yemi Osibanjo San, said there is need to take a spotlight on rising cases of abuse, citing increasing cases of baby factories, oppressive widowed practices, and conscription of children as beggars, suicide bombers, and female genital mutilation as issues of concern. He said cases of abuse are preventable and urged that the risk factors be identified and dealt with, while there is also need to counsel boys on how to treat women with equality and dignity.
One must ensure that abusers are identified and punished. The greater part of our efforts should go into ensuring that we do all in our power to prevent abuse from happening in the first place, by proactively identifying risk factors and intervening decisively to deal with them before abuse happens.
On her part, Mrs. Buhari lamented the rising case of abuse, especially of children in Nigeria, the lack of appropriate punishment for such crimes. She cited the case of a 6-month-old baby who was raped in Kano City and lamented that the perpetrator got off with a 10,000 naira fine, an indication of the urgent need to review laws related to such abuses in Nigeria. The wife of the Nigerian president also lamented rising incidents of child abuse, human trafficking, child marriage, cyberbullying, domestic violence, and abuse of the elderly across the country, despite various laws already enacted to combat them. Mrs. Buhari therefore harped on the need for education and creation of awareness on preventive measures and the need for immediate reporting of incidents to law enforcement agencies for appropriate action.
If one child or an adult is saved as a result of this workshop, it will be well worth it. Based on my experience in interacting with relevant organizations working in this area, it is reasonable to assume that most cases of abuse occur as a result of inadequate information, a lack of self-confidence among the general population. On this note, there is a need to educate people and raise necessary awareness on preventing issues and the need for immediate reporting of incidences to law enforcement agencies to take actions appropriately.
Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Boss Mustafa, while delivering the speech of the President, said Future Assured has done well as an NGO and called on other NGOs to emulate Future Assured.
The goals of this program are no doubt germane to the good aspiration of this administration. I therefore seize this opportunity to assure our dear mother that this government is ready and willing to offer this program all the needed support to enable it achieve its laudable goals.
In his remark, Senate President Bukola Saraki, represented by the Senate Deputy Majority Leader, Senator Bala Ibn Naala, said the National Assembly was committed to providing relevant laws to support victims of abuse in Nigeria.
The Gender Equality Bill remains before the National Assembly, and we hope to make some progress on it as quickly as possible.
In his keynote address, Attorney General and Minister of Justice Abubakar Malami San said the workshop was timely as it addresses issues that have perverted the news with reference to victims of illegal migration, trafficking, and slavery, many of whom have died due to wrong information. He, however, noted that the legal framework guided issues of abuse in Nigeria are robust and stressed the need for collaborative effort to check the trend. The Inspector General of Police, Ibrahim Idris, represented by his deputy in charge of operations, Mr. Abila Jushak, said women and children were most vulnerable, hence the need to adequately protect them.
It is noted that Section 42 of the Constitution of Nigeria, which is our ground norm, has clearly stated that no person shall be discriminated against on the basis of sex, culture, ethnic, or religion. It is therefore clear and unambiguous that any culture or religion or laws that tend to discriminate against women in particular is at variance with the Constitution.
At the end of the workshop, participants observed and agreed that the child abuses are mostly perpetrated by people who are close to or trusted by the victims. They also agreed that a united front to fight child abuse scourge, as well as appropriate rehabilitative measures for victims for proper integration and empowerment, was also agreed upon. Participants also agreed on the need to encourage victims and whistleblowers to speak up and not succumb to intimidation and bribery from perpetrators, while law enforcement agencies were also encouraged to go after abusers, no matter how highly placed. Laws having to do with abuse were also brought to the spotlight by the participants as the need to strengthen and fine-tune them was raised. This, it is believed, will cater for contemporary forms of abuse not captured by existing laws. States were also encouraged to domesticate such laws.
Thanks for staying with us. We now move into the quiz segment. Every week on this segment, we bring to our audience at home and respondents on the streets questions related to the SDGs. Selected winners from among the participants are already being contacted and will be invited to the Agenda 2030 studios for the live quiz segment, from where the overall winner and the runners-up will be entitled to our special prizes. As usual, we will kick off the segment by first bringing to you views of the respondents on the streets.
Abuse is wrong, but I think most of the time the problem we have is people talking about abuse.
It's inhuman because once you are abused, it affects your life.
It's not good because it's not going to be okay for the children that are growing up too. They'll be growing up in an environment that there's a lot of violence, and it's not good for the country.
I don't think it's okay for us to stay there, because the kids will get used to the abuse, and when they grow up they will also start abusing their spouse.
It depends on the level of abuse actually, but I'll go with the one that is high.
Welcome back. Last week we asked, what are the 3 dimensions of development upon which the SDGs are built? For those who didn't know, the 3 dimensions of development upon which the SDGs are built are social, economic, and environmental. We have some winners and will be contacted at the end of this program on how to make it to the studio. For our question for the week, which of the goals seek to ensure equalities and protection of the people? Send your answers to the number and email on your screen. Do endeavor to include your name and your phone numbers in your response. Remember, you can also watch this program and other episodes by subscribing to our YouTube channels on youtube.com/Fresh News TV and youtube.com/Agenda 2030 TV. You can also watch the program live on Facebook. Just log on to www.facebook.com/Fresh News NG and www.facebook.com/Agenda 2030 TV. Do follow us on all our social media platforms as Agenda 2030 TV on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Remember to drop your comments and share with your contacts. And that's our package. Do join us again next week. I am Tony John.